Welcome to the Jon Myer podcast, where we bring you thought leadership and conversations from around the world. Today, we're exploring a revolutionary approach to application delivery that's quietly transforming how organizations deploy and manage software. In an era where businesses are juggling legacy systems, cloud migrations, and the looming Windows 10 end of life deadline, the traditional methods of application virtualization are actually starting to show their age. We're joined by Arthur Hitomi, CEO and co-founder of Numecent, a pioneer in application containerization technology. Please join me in welcoming Arthur to the show. Arthur, thank you so much for joining me. Arthur, we're going to dive into it real quick, and let's start from the beginning to understand what is application containerization.
Great question. So application containerization is really very similar to what you'd understand Docker and other containerization technologies. It's basically the ability to take typically applications, perhaps some libraries, and put them into a convenient box, so to speak, another word for a container. But long story short, there's a lot of parallels, of that, of like, let's say, virtual machines conceptually, except with a container, it typically tends to be a lot lighter weight. And the big reason behind that is typically the operating system doesn't come entirely with a container.
Arthur, how is app containerization different from the traditional virtualization or even app streaming methods used?
That's another very good question. Yeah. So application virtualization, of course, it has several different meanings, and let's just step back a little bit from a virtualization standpoint, right? When we think machine virtualization is very obvious, right? There's a machine that's being virtualized. Application virtualization, actually, there's a couple different meanings. One meaning of application virtualization is something very similar to what remoting is, such as Citrix, AVD, being able to basically have a screen KVM like virtualization. And then there is the other application virtualization that kind of falls into a larger umbrella that's actually, believe it or not, really more virtualizing the operating system itself. So this kind of a bit of a misnomer, but it kind of got that. But of course, containerization is a clearer definition. But let me talk about containerization a little bit more too. When we talk about containerizing applications, obviously, as I mentioned, a big part of containerization is that there's a large part of the operating system that's not with it. You're just containerizing the applications, perhaps in the supporting libraries. That is what most people think. But also, too, I mean, from a view of containerization, especially with regards to VMs, especially with Numecent, it's really about also drawing boundaries, right, around sets of applications, and the reason why this is very important is that, as you know, with Docker and things like that, these are very valuable tools for scaling and things. But also too, when it comes to application, especially applications on desktops, and that is particularly my expertise, there's a lot of applications that talk to each other, that integrate with things, that conflict, and containerization can help solve a lot of those issues by basically saying, hey, for these sets of applications, even perhaps bleeding into the operating system a bit, I want to draw a boundary and line, and then just basically kind of isolate everything else around it, or at least control how those sets of applications might interact with the operating system and other applications. So containerization, is a very kind of is also kind of turning into a bit of nebulism, but I think it is way more succinct, much more understanding what application virtualization is.
Arthur, I remember working as a Citrix admin, Citrix engineer, and packaging, hosting applications for customers. And typically, one of the biggest things that was really difficult was the various Windows OS's versions, and even down to the hardware where you would have conflicts. How has all this changed with app containerization?
So with app containerization, a lot like Docker, right? Even though there's not a full-blown operating system, there is still some semblance of an operating system. So, for example, for CloudPaging, we have our own file system driver, right? So basically, OS, built into our container. We also have a virtual registry, everything that would basically support the application to run. Now, where we come in and help a lot of these environments, like such as the one that you talked about at Citrix, is that a lot of the times as I mentioned, Citrix is doing the virtualization more at the screen level, but then there's the bigger question. Okay, well, how is that application running? And now that we have the, as you mentioned earlier, the Windows 10 migration, what's interesting is that, okay, well, okay, I can simply, upgrade, perhaps a bunch of things, but you're also upgrading the OS that goes with it, right? Because nobody really wants to touch the OS and the whole system once it's been laid down. So that whole idea of basically moving things over, right, onto a new base OS and of course, every version of Windows has something different, right? And something doesn't run right. So imagine the container, right, having almost like a mini OS, almost a middleware of sorts, where the application always sees the same consistent environment. And that's what, containerization does, and what makes it so useful, in the DevOps world, and also even for, desktop management, right? Desktop delivery applications, because when you move those applications, you're also bringing supporting, let's just say, functions in libraries and virtualization technologies. A lot of applications that think that's always running the same place. So when you go move it to a newer version, it still looks the same.
Arthur, is there a way to deploy complex or even legacy Windows applications?
Absolutely. So one of the nice thing about, being in this field, and of course, certainly having the experience of, lots of Windows environments, right? So, the team has worked on, for example, Windows ME. We have amassed all this knowledge,
I can't
right?
believe you said Windows
I
ME.
know.
That is awesome. I had that just as I didn't mean to jump in there, man, but man, that's a little nostalgia going.
Oh yeah, yeah, you can only imagine, right? Windows ME, not many people even know about that, and it was
Does it still exist?
well, I mean, it fortunately, I've not heard any of our customers running that. Although we've certainly heard of people running Windows 98 still, Windows XP is still using in production. So there's still a lot of these old operating systems running, mainly because it just simply doesn't run on the newer Windows operating systems, and for that reason, they just kind of leave it alone and keep it running. But of course, the challenges with these things is that like a lot of our customers, and I'm sure just a lot of people out there, there are some, they may be in some regulated industry, for example, where they're required to have, the operating system, up to date, patched, and things like that. So you can only imagine, with the kinds of security holes that, as you know, right, you want to talk about the WannaCry virus, which, has, creeped up again, or not too long ago, right, on these older systems, it can really create an operational nightmare. So it is really important to try to, update things as much as you can. But of course, you've got the other challenge, like, well, but this application is so critical to our business. If the ISV has gone out of business, or perhaps the developer who developed it in house is no longer with the company. All of these challenges, right, makes it very difficult, right, to simply upgrade. And of course, rewriting the application, things like that, a lot of the times it simply isn't the answer. So they need some tooling or technology to get to the latest operating system so that it can be compliant, but at the same time rely on the old operating or old applications that is providing still much value to organizations and just people in general.
Arthur, can you give us a little bit of a backstory on what is or who is Numecent and some of the services you offer?
Great, good. So happy to. So Numecent, has had a fairly long backstory. So certainly, myself and the team has been in this space, as you mentioned. If you can, Windows ME should be a hint in terms of when I started. But long story short is that we've always been in this field of solving the whole application delivery space, and this has been a long time challenge, right? And obviously, it's still a challenge today. And so, we've have a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge in terms of, what's required to not just deliver applications, but deliver it at scale, even deliver it to, unmanaged, machines, So for example, I mentioned Windows ME. So that was something that we had to do actually at the time with Microsoft. We had to deploy um, Microsoft. It was Encarta, in fact, and that was back when encyclopedias, like before Wikipedia and things like that. Of course, these things came on CD-ROM and such. So back then, of course, delivering these types of software applications, especially online, had so many challenges. Let alone all the hiccups and issues that you might have, right, when trying to deploy these types of software applications. So we started getting into, that type of, let's say, challenges. Then, of course, over time, we started to see a lot of other challenges, including, as you mentioned, like Citrix, for example, right? There's, even though in one sense they solve the application delivery problem, it doesn't solve it entirely from, let's just say, a migration standpoint, right? Or let's just say, for example, if you want to deliver, the same application across different, whatever flavor of Windows, whether it's a Citrix VDI, Windows AVD, or a physical laptop. And the goal, of course, that everybody wants is that they want that that administration to be basically not just seamless, but identical, right, to deploying to any of these types of environment. And that's what we focus on, right? Is really can we get any applications, Windows and beyond, so that when you go to deploy, it is very easy, and that we relieve a lot of these headaches that you have, and especially when it comes to applications that may be dated. And effectively, what our tooling does too is not only helps get them to the later operating systems, but in some senses, we also help modernize the application by basically creating, a container bubble that provides it more additional capabilities than what the ISV or the in-house application developer originally intended. And John, one of the our products solves all these issues. So, and we have a product called CloudPaging, and also CloudPager, which is our hosted orchestration system. So CloudPaging, which is our container, does many of these things that I mentioned with regards to solving compatibility issues. And at a very high level, what CloudPaging, as a product does is one, it containerizes the applications, and it does it by first taking, let's just say, a software application, and then with our tool, it helps configure the application and prepares it so that it can be put into the container properly. And once that's done, then the container itself can then be what's called published or uploaded, and be ready to deliver to wherever it needs to go. Then last, the phase of it is from the with the container and the orchestration tool help deliver that application where it needs to go. So, cloud paging is all cloud based, hence, the cloud name and cloud paging. And then also too, Cloud Pager, which is more of our cloud hosted product, that allows you to orchestrate or move these containers right to any target device that you want with minimal configuration, or none at all, ideally. And not have to worry about having to quote unquote migrate, right? In fact, with containerization, our belief is that you no longer have to migrate ever again. And on top of that, things like you might have like headaches like image management, things like that. I mean, our belief is like, hey, let's try to eliminate managing any of those things. Just take down, whatever the latest version is that maybe from Microsoft or some other provider, and then just bring your applications down and deploy them, at will.
Which industries would actually benefit the most from this technology and why?
That's a great question. We've certainly had a huge amount of success in the financial industry. The reason behind that is that many of these financial industries, still rely on, let's just say, not only legacy applications, but also the latest and greatest applications as well too. And the reality is that when you need to deliver a set of tools for somebody, I mean, you have to bring everything, with it, right? At least have them be able to access everything. So from that standpoint, being able to easily bring them over to whatever latest environment, and on top of that, keeping a lot of these, let's just say, older applications going, is something that we are the best at. Also, too, another industry that we're quite successful at is the defense sector. So a lot of these defense and government, let's just say, they have what's called the CI, critical infrastructure, where they have to have certain applications available to, let's just say, keep things operational and running. So, for example, one of our customers has, manages the LAX airport, and in order to bring up to modify the airport, they have to bring things up in the original applications that things are designed in, right, from the plans and things like that, so they can keep things consistent. Also, any other tooling, right? That plugins, other tools that might integrate with it, all that running, and then at the same time, try to keep the OS up to date so that you don't, have any security issues and things like that. So in environments like that, you're really, left with, a tool like ours that, helps you move those applications, right? And then, like I said, helps modernize them. But also too, be able to deliver those applications to wherever they need to go to. And as the world, the connectivity and things like that have changed so much, right? Where, you have people all over the world. So being able to instantly deliver those workloads to wherever you need to go is particularly important.
Arthur, my last question for you is with cloud migration and Windows 10 end of life ahead, how is app containerization evolving or addressing this issue?
That's a yeah. From that standpoint, as there's a lot of talk around AI. There's a lot of talk around cloud still, and then of course now security. So not surprisingly, right? I mean, it's hard not to you know, bump into somebody that's talking about one of those three things. And certainly, that is absolutely true with containerization. So from that perspective, one of the things that we've been seeing is that a lot of discussions around can the container help secure things, and there's been a lot of debate about that, right? And one of the big debates is like, well, if the container doesn't have everything, including the OS all coupled together, then is it as secure? And no, I certainly, there's certainly an argument to that. But I think with a lot of these things, it's all about, trying to get more to a zero trust, environment is trying to also make things a lot more manageable, right? And also being able to configure things on the fly. So I think from that perspective, really, the idea of being able to very quickly move these applications, also divide the applications that don't really kind of change much, right? Or if they were to change, they would all change together. If you can segment them, right, that's a good way to manage, security, right, and kind of contain, what needs to be checked on, because of course, the if you can find a way to compartmentalize or containerize, right? Those applications, that kind of work together and don't change, let's just say, as frequently, and then keep those other things that might change at different times away. Then that way you can independently update these things, right? And that can really, really help. So that's the security piece of things. As far as the AI goes, where we've been doing having a lot of success on is two areas. One is that, as I mentioned, cloud paging and CloudPager helps with the delivery things. We've been actually using, I don't say AI, but ML, right? And a lot of people group that together. ML to help analyze what parts of that application is actually being used, and then just deliver that piece right onto the target system. And we do that analysis every single time somebody launches an application so that we're profiling on how things are being used, right? Has the environment changed where they're using different parts of the application? We collect all that information. So the very next day, we control how often, but the very next day usually is that, they'll get a reprofile of that application in its most optimal form that we know. And then the other part of AI that we really do well now, and of course we just released this product just recently, is what's called the AI packaging. And what's so cool about this is that that three-step process that I mentioned in terms of how cloud paging works and how you get things up. A big part of that is helping configure that application and preparing it. This is stuff that nobody really wants to do that often. We now have it completely automated with AI. That from that perspective, I think is not just a huge time saver, but more importantly, I mean, as you know, John, I mean, whether it's CrowdStrike or some of these other things, right? These updates, I mean, they just keep coming. People keep reacting. People keep breaking things. I mean, there's people just need to get faster. And honestly, the first thing, unfortunately, people have to do is just be able to be react quicker, right? I mean, of course, use the tools to help manage, the change, right? Which is what our tool allows. But also, too, the things like the AI packaging can make things, really really faster to work and then have less steps, right? And make less human errors, right? While you're reacting to this 0 day vulnerability. And then the last piece, of course, is cloud, right? From the cloud I mentioned to you, we talked a lot about, the delivery aspects, what we're doing from an AI standpoint. But of course, in Windows desktop land, hey, there, the people are running, Windows XP, and they're still running this stuff. So just getting them right, into cloud has certainly now become a major enabler, right? That is like finally, okay, maybe it's time to, shut that machine down, running in the closet, right? And then run it into something much more modern, such as Microsoft AVD or Windows 365. So we have a lot of customers and great use cases. In fact, we just had a very large company take what was running on XP and then migrate things to AVD just last week. So we're super happy to see these kind of results very, very often.
Arthur, thank you so much for joining us on the Jon Myer podcast. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, John. Appreciate your time.
Well, everybody, thank you for joining us on the Jon Myer podcast. If you found value in today's conversation with Arthur Hitomi, CEO and co-founder of Numecent, about the evolution of application containerization and the future of software deployment, be sure to subscribe and share this episode with other technology leaders wrestling with legacy systems and modernization challenges. Until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible.